Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Kid Lee. Day 1 of E3 2014 has come to a close. A lot of really cool stuff was announced today, so this will be a recap show of what was announced. Now, let me give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm going to do for format for this show and then for sort of the rest of the week. So, this particular video is going to go over the press conferences. The Microsoft, EA, Ubisoft, and Sony press conferences. And then the rest of the week, we're going to get into the super detail on the actual games as I get to see them. So I'm not going to be going into any super detail today. Again, that will be for the rest of the week. But we get to go over the news, what came out in these conferences. So let's go ahead and start with Microsoft. And I have a little note sheet that I'm going off of here, notes that I have taken during the events. So, Microsoft kicked off with Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. They showed a live gameplay demo, and visually that game looks very impressive. I've got to say, when I was watching that, it kind of reminded me of The Matrix a little bit. They actually had this thing where they were fighting like swarms, like if you've seen the third Matrix movie, when they're like defending their home base. I forget what the name of it was, but like the swarms of machines like going together. They had something really similar to that. So that game looks really interesting. So like I said, they just did a gameplay demo of that. So that game looks pretty cool. Next on, they jumped to Forza Horizon 2. Which is going to be released on September 30th. That is going to be their open world or open road version of Forza. It's going to feature full day-night cycles, dynamic weather. They're promising a 1080p. The clubs in-game will be able to have 1,000 members. And they're also saying that that game is going to have drop-in, drop-out co-op in the open world, without having to wait or go into lobbies. So that should be pretty cool. Next up was a new IP by the name of Evolve. They just showed a very quick, very brief trailer on that. From what I could gather, it looks like a squad-based alien shooter where you're able to choose from 4 different classes. Or they throw in the twist of you can also be the bad guy or the monster in the game. So it'd be really interesting to see how that works. Next up, they jumped into Assassin's Creed Unity with a live gameplay demo showing off the 4-person story co-op on how you're able to strategize the kills and plan out things before you do them. So that definitely looks cool. They're also sort of pumping this next Assassin's Creed as being the first truly next-gen Assassin's Creed. So we'll have to wait and see on that. It was a little hard to tell from the gameplay if that's true or not. Next up, they jumped into just a brief trailer for Dragon Age Inquisition. That game is going to be released on October 7th. That game looks fantastic. I'm a huge fan of the Dragon Age series. Next up was a game that was revealed at last E3, but we really haven't seen much on it since, and that's Sunset Overdrive. They did announce that that was going to be released October 28th. So they ended up showing a live gameplay demo. Just a little bit of info on that game. It's a free-running, fast-paced third-person shooter in a post, end-of-the-world setting. I have here in my note that it's going to have 8-player co-op. I'm not sure if that's right, but it's in my notes. That's what I wrote down. So 8-player co-op. Character customization, and it's a game that's very silly, and it does not take itself seriously at all. So that definitely looks like a fun one. Something a little different with that, free-running, fast-paced third-person shooter. So keep an eye on that one. Next up, they had Fable Legends. And the Fable series is something that's been kind of up and down. It's like there's maybe a good one and a couple of bad ones. This one looks decent. They did a live gameplay demo on that. They showed off that there will be different hero types, such as mage, rogue, that sort of thing. This game's also going to feature a 4-player sort of story co-op mode. And I've got to say, looking at that game, and also keeping an eye on what's been shown for EverQuest Next, Fable Legends looks a lot like EverQuest Next. Like, a lot. It's a little crazy. And then Fable Legends is also going to have a villain versus players mode, where the 4 players have to, like, infiltrate a dungeon or something. And there's one person, one villain, who almost has to do, like, a tower defense type game against the other 4 players to try and stop them from, like, infiltrating the dungeon. So that's kind of interesting. Next up, we had a new IP called Ori and the Blind Forest. And I might put a link below this video on this trailer, because I watched this trailer and it was so sad. I kid you not, I almost started crying. But no, that trailer was just so sad. You guys will definitely have to check that one out. Crank up the sound, and it's like, look at their little faces when the trailer's going on. It's just so sad. Next up was the Halo Master Chiefs Collection, which will come out November 11th. And for $60, you're going to get Halo 1, 2, 3, and 4. And they're also remastering Halo 2. Halo 1 has already been HD remastered. So 1 and 2 remastered, and then 3 and 4 as is. But $60, all 4 games, that's pretty impressive. They're also saying that all 4 will run at 1080p 60 frames per second, and you will be getting over 100 multiplayer maps with the collection. You will also be receiving the Halo Nightfall sort of TV show that they're working on, and you will also get Halo 5 Guardians beta access. So for $60, that is quite the deal. Next, we will move on to another new IP called Inside. This is from the makers of Limbo, and they did just a short trailer on it. And again, it's going to be fairly similar to Limbo in some aspects. It's sort of your side-scrolling action adventure type game. Next up on the list, and this was a surprise for me, even though we knew it was going to come out eventually, is they showed off a trailer for the second Tomb Raider game, and this one is going to be called Rise of the Tomb Raider. So hopefully it will be just as good, if not better, than the last one, because the last one was fantastic. Then next up, they showed a live gameplay trailer for The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. That game continues to look impressive. Next up, they are doing a remake on Phantom Dust. So they showed a quick trailer for that. Phantom Dust, I believe, was an original Xbox game back in like 2001, 2002, somewhere in that range. Or actually, maybe it was a little later than that, maybe 2003, 2004. But you get the idea, in that general range. Next up was a brief trailer for The Division. I'll get into The Division a little bit more here in just a little bit, but that game continues to look amazing as well. Next up was a new IP by the name of Scalebound. They showed a brief gameplay trailer on this, and not quite sure what to think about this one. Basically, it showed like 2 giant monsters fighting. It was like a dragon fighting I forget what it was, like a squid monster or something. And the character had a sword, and I think it's going to be played from a third-person perspective. And it's like whatever monster the character is fighting, he's able to take on like the scales of that creature. So again, it's like he was fighting the dragon, and he could like then form like dragon scales all over his body. So not quite sure what they're going to do with that one. So again, have to keep an eye on that one. And finally, for the Microsoft Press Events, their big announcement was the brand new Crackdown game. So we just got a brief look at that. So that should be interesting. So we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the EA press event. And they kicked off the show with Star Wars Battlefront. Now, unfortunately, we didn't get to see, like super live gameplay and all that. It was just too early for that. But they still put together a nice little presentation showing off just little brief glimpses of the game. I think it was all like pre-alpha footage. But the game, it looks like they're going to do a good job on it. But it's definitely too early to tell on that. Next up, they went into Dragon Age Inquisition. The one thing new that we did learn from EA was it appears that Dragon Age Inquisition is going to have a subsystem targeting mode. They were fighting a dragon, and it's like they could target like individual parts on the dragon. It's like target the tail or target the left leg or whatever. And in that game, it has a party system that you can switch in between the different party members. So you could actually have different party members sort of targeting different areas of the dragon. So it'd be interesting to see what you're able to do with that. They briefly mentioned the next Mass Effect game, saying that the next game is going to be in an area of space that has not been explored in the first 3. So, again, I'm a huge fan of the Mass Effect series. So, we'll wait and see on that one. Next, they jumped into The Sims 4. They actually did a fairly decent presentation on this. Anybody who's fans of that series will be happy to know that basically they're saying that there's going to be deeper simulation than ever before, better character creation with more options, and they're introducing a new sort of browser feature where you're actually able to browse like other people's characters along with like their full profiles and moods and actually export or import them into your game. So that looked pretty interesting. Next up was Madden 15. Anybody who played what was basically Madden 14, there was a big problem with defenses in that game. So for Madden 15, they're promising to fix the defenses, make it better, more fun to play. They're redesigning the tackle system, and they've added over 100 new emotes. Because if you watch real football, whenever they make a sack or a good tackle or whatever, they usually try and, do something. So they're adding that into Madden 15. Next up for EA was just a very brief look at Dawngate, which is their new MOBA. They're trying to compete with League of Legends and Dota a little bit, but what they're saying on this one is it's going to be a MOBA with deep story, which is something that like League of Legends initially didn't have, and then it's something that they sort of have introduced as the game has gone on. Next up was a brief look at Mirror's Edge 2. They just went over some concept art and some general gameplay. Again, that game looks good. And finally, they rounded up with the brand new Battlefield Hardline, which is going to be the Battlefield game for this year. And they're going away from the whole army guy persona, and this one is like straight up cops and robbers. So you're either playing a police officer or a member of the SWAT team. And I believe the game is going to take place in LA, but don't quote me on that. And they're going to do stuff like 32-player match heist, like where the robbers go in and they're trying to like rob a bank or something. They have to go in and get out, and then the cops or SWAT team have to try and stop them. So they're doing stuff like that. But that went ahead and rounded out the EA press event. So next up was the Ubisoft event. They kicked off the show with the announcement of Far Cry 4. And they basically straight up showed the first 5 minutes of the game. And anybody who's played that series will know that those games are pretty crazy. So the first 5 minutes of that game did not disappoint. Lots of crazy stuff going on. They then jumped into The Division. Again, a little bit more gameplay, trailer. So I guess I'll just briefly go over The Division if nobody has heard of that one. It was actually announced at E3 last year, but The Division is going to be basically an MMO shooter, if you want to call it that. and it's using, I want to say, the Snowdrop engine. But that game really impressed people last year when they did the live gameplay demonstration, what they were able to do with like physics and dynamics. You know, they were in a gunfight and they were around these cop cars, and it's like you could actually see the individual bullets going through the windows and blowing out the tires, and just the amount of detail that they're putting into the Division looks just absolutely fantastic. It's better than anything that we've seen. So hopefully I'll get to see some more on that later in the week and can go into more detail on it. Next up is The Crew, which again was shown at E3 last year, and The Crew is basically an MMO car game. And the game space is literally the entire United States. You can literally drive from coast to coast. They've done some times on that, and it takes, I forget exactly what they said. I know it was over an hour. I want to say it was like 2 hours or something like that to drive from coast to coast, and that might have been in like the fastest car they had or something along those lines. But that game looks really interesting. Then they then jumped into Assassin's Creed Unity, and again they showed off an impressive trailer, again sort of featuring the 4-player co-op. And then they showed off a duck and cover system for Assassin's Creed, which I haven't played the last like 1 or 2, but as far as I'm aware, the last 2 did not have a Gears of War style duck and cover system. So I think that's going to be new for Assassin's Creed. Next up, we have a new IP called Valiant Hearts: The Great War, and this was another game or trailer they showed that was very, very sad. There was actually several of these at this E3. It's like they're showing off this stuff and it's like super sad. It's like crazy. But this game, Valiant Hearts, is actually based on letters from World War I vets that never returned home. So you can kind of imagine what that game's going to be like. And they're doing it in a very, cartoony type style. So, yeah, crazy on that one. And then finally, the big announcement from Ubisoft was a brand new Rainbow Six. And I believe it's been 6 years since there's been one. So this one is Rainbow Six Siege. And the little bit of gameplay they showed off on this one was a 5v5 multiplayer battle. It was actually basically it was a house, and there was 2 teams, sort of the good guys and bad guys, if you want to call it that, or the SWAT and the robbers. And basically the robbers were in a house, and they had a hostage, and they were actually in the house, and they were able to like board up the windows and doors and all that stuff. And the SWAT team was able to actually start on the outside of the house, and there was like a picture of the house, and they were able to actually plan out their tactical view on how they were going to infiltrate the house. And then once they initiated, they then, were able to go from there. So that game looks really interesting. They only showed off this multiplayer, so we know nothing about any campaign or anything along those lines. So that was the end of Ubisoft. And finally, we have the Sony press event, which got over pretty late. They actually ran like 30 minutes over, which is crazy. But they kicked off their show with Destiny, a trailer for that game. A little bit of information that was released on that is the beta for Destiny is going to be on the PlayStation 4 first, and it's going to be July 17th. And they're also coming out with an all-white PS4 Destiny bundle. So that game, I've already pre-ordered that game, and I hope to be showing coverage on that as soon as I am able to. So that game looks good. Next up was the Order 1886, which was a game that was announced last year at E3. And they showed basically one trailer last year. And the best way I could describe that game is, if anybody has seen The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Sean Connery, on how it's like so-called heroes and they have sort of technology that they're not necessarily supposed to have for the time. it kind of reminds me of that, but we got into some actual gameplay for this year, and it's very dark and gritty, and the one hero was like fighting a werewolf, and that's pretty much all they showed on that. Next was a new IP called Intertwined, and again, this was another one of these sad deals. It was kind of weird, and this one is a very artsy type game, which the PlayStation is famous for when you look at, Journey and those kind of games. But this one is a bird and a fish who fall in love but can't be together because they're so different. Aw, right? So I'll keep an eye on that one. So their next big announcement was actually Little Big Planet 3, which is a really big IP for the PlayStation. A few new things that they are adding. Basically, the main character in that game is a little guy called Sackboy, and Sackboy now has some friends. One is called Toggle, and he is able to become like big and small, or basically heavy and light. And then there's another friend called Swoop, which is basically a bird, and he can fly. So when you add in these other like little player types, it sort of changes up how you can work the puzzles. Or develop the the sort of land or playthrough that you're doing with that game. So yep, it's gonna feature all new co-op play and puzzles. Next up is a new IP called Bloodborne, and they basically just showed a trailer on that. Basically, all we could gather from that would be it's co-op, or actually. Sorry, I just lost my note there for a second. Bloodborne. That one is a zombie shooter. And it's hard to tell if that one is an actual shooter or a hack and slash or some combination of the two. So keep an eye on that one. They then went into Far Cry 4. They said that the actual land that you're going to be playing on is called K-Rat, and just visually from the video, it looks like it's a land with heavy forest and mountains, and it's also going to introduce a 2-player co-op, but I wasn't sure if it was actually in the story mode that you were able to do this, or a secondary mode like what they had in Far Cry 3. Next up was Dead Island 2. They showed off a brief trailer for that, and I thought that I heard Jack Black's voice in the trailer, but I could be wrong, so keep an eye out for that. So Jack Black might be in Dead Island 2 as one of the main characters. Next up was a fairly popular announcement that they are doing an HD remake on Grim Fandango. So there you go on that, if you were a fan of that original game. Next up was a new IP called Abzu, and this is from the makers of Journey. And you can kind of see I'm playing sort of the trailer in the background here as I'm talking. But again, a very artsy PlayStation game. Next up was a new IP called No Man's Sky. And this one, a lot of people are talking about this one. This one looks really interesting. I might actually have to do a separate video on this game. But I can tell you that it's an indie game. And in the trailer that they showed, it was like a guy on a planet. Now, is it a first-person shooter, third-person shooter? Something like that? I don't know. But he was on this alien world, and there was wildlife and dinosaurs, and all of a sudden he walks over to his little fighter, a spaceship fighter, and he takes off. He's flying in the sky, and then he goes straight up, and he's doing atmospheric flight, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's in outer space. And then all of a sudden, a convoy appears out of nowhere, and all of a sudden, he's in a dogfight. So it's like, whoa, what the heck? 1 minute you're on the ground looking at dinosaurs, and it's like an adventure game, but the next minute you're in a space combat. It's like, what the heck? So that game looks really interesting. They did say that it is sort of a multiplayer open world, and it's like a never-ending universe, so things are always going to be different, and no two players will ever start on the same planet. So I don't know how they're going to pull that off. But yeah, I hope I get to see more of that, because I definitely want to see more on that. Next up was the first gameplay of Mortal Kombat X. And at its core mechanics, it looks like, every other Mortal Kombat game. They brought back in the zoom in, bone-breaking type deal. Visually, it looks very impressive. The best-looking Mortal Kombat game that's ever been done. And second from the last here, there was a new trailer for Metal Gear Solid: The Phantom Pain. And it was another, basically a straight-up story trailer. And again, that game looks really good. And then finally, the big final announcement from Sony was Uncharted 4: A Thief's End. And what they showed us, it was kind of hard to tell if that was a cinematic trailer or if it was actual gameplay, but either way, it looks damn impressive. So we'll be getting a new Uncharted in 2015. But, ladies and gentlemen, that is it. That's all the news from the press conferences. So, stay tuned for my continuing coverage on E3 2014, and we'll be getting into a lot more detail on the games in the coming days. So with that being said, everybody keep playing and have fun.